as challenging as it might seem, you know, have a bookkeeper, record your debits and credits, even though you can do it yourself, figure out those things that, like, figure out those things that you can hire somebody for 10, 20, $30 an hour for, and it might seem like more work the first time, but then you can go work on the things that are worth $500 an hour. Depending on what kind of business we're talking about, you can't just work on your current customer. You have to have somebody who's out there finding the next customer. And it's probably the entrepreneur at that stage of the business that has to do that. But you can outsource the maintenance or the website updates or the customer follow-ups or the bookkeeping. You can outsource that stuff.
This episode of Business Growth is with David Shirkey. Now, we're going to be talking about a family office, and most people have never heard of a family office. It's typically reserved for families that have about 100 million or more in assets to manage. Now, that's not always the situation, but in most cases, it is. He's going to talk about what it is like to manage a family office, what it also takes to create a family legacy, and we're going to dive into some of the operations and things that they've done at Orbitform, the company that they have. Now, it's incredibly valuable to get this insight. One, because most of the time, you're not going to get accurate information about a family office. Two, you're going to get sold something. And three, you're going to have it totally misconstrued, and you're going to feel like A, you can't get there, or B, that you're just going to have someone else run your life and run your finances. All of those are going to be busted. We're also going to be talking about a wealth vehicle that a lot of these family offices use, and you as an individual can use so that you can become your own bank. I know, sounds weird. Anyways, this episode is incredibly valuable. David and I have spent a lot of time talking together one-on-one in person, and then also on this interview. Feel free to send him an email if you liked the episode, and if you have questions. That information will be inside of the show notes, or you can connect with him on LinkedIn. So we're going to jump into the interview, and please give us your feedback. Let us know what you think of these types of conversations, as it's a little bit different from our normal format. We have an interesting episode today. The reason why this is such an interesting episode is because we're going to be talking with David Shirkey. And for a lot of business owners out there, you have the aspirations of going from 1 to 100, and then you go from 100 to 1,000,000, or whatever that would be. Those timelines are different. But ultimately, a lot of us are looking for legacy. And this is a legacy episode. So David Shirkey is the director of strategy at Orbitform, and that's a family-owned business. And now he's also in the role of the family office manager. If you've never heard the term of family office, you're going to learn what that is today in this episode. So David, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks a lot, Spencer. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. So you and I, we've known each other for a while. We had several meals together and got to talk. You have this amazing role that you're in. But before we go there, first tell us what Orbitform is, why it's a family-owned business, what you guys do, and what you do there currently.
Okay, yeah. So Orbitform is what's called a machine design and machine build company. So we build machines that our customers use in their factories. Highly engineered and just pretty unique automated and semi-automated machines is our product. Yes, and is why it's the family business. My father had an opportunity in the 80s to join the business and lead and become the president, and that was his kind of big break, as he was offered some equity, and then over time he was able to grow the business and buy out the original partners, and so that's why I said why it's now considered a family business, because we have succession planning in place, and as well as some shareholder transitioning in place, so that my siblings and I are buying Orbitform from my parents.
Can you give us some examples of what the company size is, employees, things like that? Yeah. Feel free to keep confidential whatever you need to keep confidential.
Yep. We have 115 people who work here at Orbitform. We have about 107,000 square foot facility. We do almost everything we can in-house. We We cut, bend, weld, grind, paint, assemble, wire, design, program. We have the whole gamut of technical resources, in our facility.
Now, you use the word succession plan, and I think that's pertinent to this conversation today because you have this role of being the family office manager, and family office is a thing that a lot of people don't know about. So, can you explain first what the family office is and then what your role is as the family office manager?
Yeah, if you would have talked to me in 2016, I wouldn't have known or ever heard of a family office either. Um, I guess I've been very fortunate, have a chance to kind of step away from the day-to-day kind of leadership. We hired a pro chief financial officer in 2017, and that freed me up to kind of move into this more strategy, more long-term thinking kind of role. And along that time frame, we started working on things like estate planning, succession planning, things that my dad and I didn't really have any experience with. And just through a lot of discussion and trying to define like what we're trying to accomplish, talk to my siblings about what their interests are. None of my two siblings, a brother and sister, they don't work here, but they're kept apprised of what's going on. We have monthly reports, and every 4 months we have a board meeting that my siblings attend. So anyway, just trying to learn how to transfer the business, in the most fair and tax efficient and legal way possible. The family office kind of stuff just kind of came about.
Yeah, that's really incredible to think about that. So, there's a lot of things that we're going to unpack in this conversation. One, I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, I'll say for myself, I've had a few exits, and they haven't been humongous exits, but we often don't think about tax implications when we're starting out. And then you only think about that once you've gone through and you're working with an accountant or attorneys. And then you say, wow, this is like my biggest expense, which is, that's a part of it. And then rarely in a lot of the small businesses that we set up and start, are we thinking about a succession plan? We may be thinking about an exit, a transaction, but we're not thinking legacy. And so I would love to get into your head on what that legacy world looks like.
Well, it can be messy. I'll tell you that. It's been pretty fascinating to look at it from where we're sitting now to the past few years, because there was a point in time, probably in 2017, that I was like, Dad, listen, sell it to me. I'll make sure my siblings are taken care of. They'll be equal partners, but I got to be in charge. We can't have this, uncertain shareholder and decision-making world. And we were kind of in that holding place for quite a while. I think both my father and I, it just took time to talk and determine what each other's interest and comfort and, positions were. And eventually, I think just through communication and sharing each other's goals, we got to a point where I think we have an equitable and fair succession plan now, where I'm not officially the controlling shareholder or anything in the future, but we have a board set up now, and we have documented estate plan and documented shareholder transition plan and documented valuations and tax planning and life insurance vehicles in place to help with some of these potential. I mean, if we're fortunate enough to continue having a profitable business that's worth a decent amount of money, then we're going to rely on some of these life insurance and estate planning vehicles to help us get through those tax challenges.
One of the things, for listeners, that David is inferring, talking about as far as life insurance vehicles, and I haven't touched this on the podcast, which is there are tools that you can use to become a family bank and get the leverage and the capacity just like a bank would. I don't really share that much on this podcast. It's actually on another podcast that I co-host called the Prosperity Podcast, where my co-host, Kim Butler, she goes into those, and it's absolutely valuable. And what I'm curious is, roll back to 2016, maybe even 2015, you were in the role of growing the business. Even consider thinking of succession plans and legacy and all of that? Or were you just thinking grow, grow, grow as big as we can get?
Yeah, I would say it was grow, 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 and it was just sales and profits, and it took a huge amount of time and energy to devote attention to transferring the ownership and transferring the leadership, and I mean it's like a whole different part of your brain, and it's easy to understand why business owners don't work on it, because it's not urgent, and it's just it's like it's legal, it's financial, it's feelings, it's family, it's all that stuff.
It's all the stuff that's awful. Yeah, absolutely. Did you originally have to hire someone from McKinsey or some other consultancy to navigate this, or was it picking up a book and getting ideas and kind of going through it yourself?
There was some of all that. There's some family business consulting groups out there, and we were referred to a couple of those, and we did engage with one to kind of play the role of interviewing my mom, my dad, my siblings, and I, and trying to help us communicate and have a framework behind the communication. That was kind of a short-term project that he didn't stay involved with the final, estate planning and actual shareholder agreements and all that. But I think he helped us start the communication in a mature, effective way. And then we eventually, I think probably mostly through my research and networking, got introduced to some estate planning attorneys. They were highly regarded, and he seemed to really, he just told me almost exactly what we were trying to accomplish without even knowing who we were. He just kind of said, well, this is what I often see in your shoes. And I was like, wow, obviously this attorney has been down this path. And so was a big thing in helping us take our verbal and written kind of goals and put them on paper into legal documents and operating agreements and shareholder agreements and estate plans and that kind of thing.
I think it's funny because when we go through this, we often feel like it's a unique situation. But when you talk with an expert and someone that's been in, the ring for a long time, I mean, there's small deviations, but really it's pretty common. So go back to when early days of you working in the company, do you, and this is kind of a loaded question, but do you wish that you would have set up some of these succession plans, and would it have cost you less time and headache had you done it in the past? Or are you glad that it just happened when it did in 2016, 17, et cetera?
I got to give a lot of credit to my father, because I think I'm fortunate to be part of a family that maybe money isn't money's important, profit's important, but it's not all we think about and talk about. So I think what happened is my father has more interests than just keeping control and making the most money. I mean, he wants to see not just the family members, but all of our employees, succeed and have opportunities. I think that perspective was probably the most important thing in this whole deal, because it's just, if you want to get everything, then there's no room for, if you want to maximize the amount of money you get in a transaction, that wasn't going to happen in doing it with a family transaction. I mean, we could have done a private equity deal and sold this thing for, who knows, maybe double of what me and my siblings are buying it for. So I think that was a key part, was that I feel fortunate that my dad, the controlling shareholder, had more interests than just financial interests.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I've had conversations with billionaires. You have to be really focused on what it is that you want. If money is that number one driver,
sure,
then it has to be the number one driver. And if that is the priority, I get it. But you have to sacrifice a lot of things for that. And for you, I think one of the reasons why you and I are talking and why we resonated well is, I sat down and we had food with you and your wife. We talked about our kids. family was important to you, not just money. That's what was the legacy, and that's why we're having this conversation.
Yeah, and believe me, I mean, we're very blessed to be in a strong financial position and have a good business. But you're right. We try to keep our faith and our families and community as a ultimate higher.
Yeah, absolutely.
objective.
So, as we navigate this world of family office, tell us, once you've gained capital, and from for most of our listeners, for you to understand, a lot of family offices, the value of the capital that they have to use for investments can vary, but I'd say in most cases, typically around $100 million is typical. I'm not stating that that's where you guys are at or anything like that, but what does that role look like as far as you strategizing, deploying capital, deciding on investments?
Well, I can, maybe this will be helpful. 2 weeks ago, we had a family ski trip with my parents and my brother's family and my sister's family and my family. So I prepared a whole agenda to have family business meetings, from 7 to 9 a.m. Saturday, Sunday, and Monday mornings. And I had a full agenda, which part of it included a review of all of our investments, as of end of 2019, and then a discussion of our current asset allocation, current versus what my father and I had talked about before about desired asset allocation. And then we identified 5 or 6 asset classes that we want to invest in, and we put a dollar amount there for each of those asset categories to invest in 2020. And then we talked about, some of the bigger issues in Orbitform and some of the bigger issues in some of our key personnel here in the business. We talked about a vacation home that got a lot of discussion. I really feel like we need to get a vacation home somewhere warm so my parents can enjoy it, because life's short, right? And we talked a lot about that. We talked about the family bank, like you mentioned. Like, I don't want to dive into that too deep, but like one of my brothers, we're gonna refinance their mortgage with our family bank, and my sister's family might be looking for a bigger house. And we talked about how maybe they shouldn't think of some of the constraints they currently have in mind. Like we should figure out how to get around those constraints. We talked about so I'm part of generation 2. We talked a lot about generation 3. The oldest generation 3 person, my nephew, is 18 now, freshman in college. And I've helped him get an internship this summer with the real estate development group, so that we can see if we can get somebody in Gen 3 moving down the real estate path. Just a lot of really, really cool. I mean, my father said, when I sent the agenda, he said, "We're going to need a week for this." and it truly was about 6 hours of the time together. Does that help? Does that help? The kind of
Absolutely helps. Yeah, because I think a lot of people, they don't plan in that way. Most, I think you've got different levels. You've got probably the most predictable, and I don't want to use the word lazy, but I can't think of a different word, of just setting New Year's resolutions or looking at maybe your bank statement and the investments you have. And then, you can ratchet up from there, and you can do quarterly and looking at your P&Ls and the asset allocation you've done, and investment strategies. But you guys are doing that, but on top of it, you're looking at generation 3. And I imagine there's probably even succession plans for generation 4 in there, of saying, here are the values, the principles that we hold as a family. Here's what we want to continue to convey to these next generations.
Yeah. No, we have, that was some of the soft and maybe challenging things that we documented back in 2017. Who are we, and what do we want to try to achieve and accomplish on the soft side of things. I thought I might also add, like in our family meetings from recently, I often need to kind of go back and I share like the org structure of the different entities we have and how the trusts are set up, because I'm the only person that deals with this stuff daily, weekly, monthly. So but I think it's really important that least we have something that my brother or brother-in-law or my mom could grab onto and be like, okay, here's a chart that shows all the different LLCs and what's the ownership of each LLC and what's the purpose of each LLC and what investments are held by each LLC. So like that was a big part of our meeting too, it forces me to document what we're doing.
Excellent. Here's what I would love to do. I would love to get your insider advice on a couple different scenarios. So we have the entrepreneurs out there that are starting out. They may have some traction, but they're in that range, call it $0 to $100,000 in revenue, which is very early business. What kind of advice would you give to them? And then we'll jump to different stages.
I guess part of me wants to say to think big, like as challenging as it might seem, have a bookkeeper, record your debits and credits, even though you can do it yourself, figure out those things that, figure out those things that you can hire somebody for $10, $20, $30 an hour for, and it might seem like more work the first time, but then you can go work on the things that are worth $500 an hour. Depending on what kind of business we're talking about, you can't just work on your current customer. You have to have somebody who's out there finding the next customer. And it's probably the entrepreneur at that stage of the business that has to do that. But you can outsource the maintenance or the website updates or the customer follow-ups or the bookkeeping. You can outsource that stuff.
Now, how about the business owner that's between 100,000 and $1 million? And the reason why I'm using these figures is because I've owned lots of businesses and I see a lot of them. Crossing that 100,000 is a threshold, and really between 100 and $1 million, it's not a lot of differences.
I guess now you're to the point where you're probably taking on employees, and so you got to decide: do you want to build a business that has several employees and all the associated challenges that come along with that, and the legal challenges, the human resource challenges, the benefits, and so I think at this stage it's deciding: do I want to build this business and have a bunch of employees, or do I want to, maybe if it's growing, maybe I want to sell it and do something more that's more entrepreneurial, like it was when I was at the start.
Okay.
So I think it's a huge crossover, having employees versus not having employees.
Absolutely. So the 1 to 10 million is that next step. What kind of advice do you give for that person?
Maybe you're to the point where you really got to have like standard operating procedures now, because you're going to have turnover. Maybe you're able to actually think about replacing yourself in 95% of what you're doing within the business. So you're going to have documentation and standard operating procedures, and talking about building capacity. Like building capacity meaning, I think a business, ideally, you should only be using 80% of your capacity at any given time, because you can actually go after opportunities. But most of us, we're probably operating at 120% of our capacity, because I'm not sure if that's helpful or not, but you're probably also you're also in the stage of needing to have your documents tight. You got to have your legal documents tight. I mean, you got to have your books, your financial records tight, because you can probably sell a business that's doing $1 million or less without having third party, audited or reviewed financials. But now you can't. If you want to get a loan, a line of credit, or if you want to get a loan from a bank, you're going to need to have some legit records.
Your comment about the 80% capacity and 100, I've actually never heard anyone say it that way. That was really insightful. So for listeners, hit that rewind button and listen to that again. It was really good. Now, the final stage that we're going to touch in this is crossing that 10 million a year mark. What advice do you give for that person?
I guess it's you're recruiting like executives now. You're recruiting people who are better than you, for sure. You might have been the master technologist or the master salesperson, but now you're recruiting people that hopefully are better than you in that sector. So you're setting up some long-term compensation plans and setting up a bonus program. Having an employee handbook, probably really double checking your insurance coverages for property, casualty, liability, D&O, I mean, things that you just forget about. And then it's like, wow, I only have $500,000 of coverage for, if somebody gets kidnapped. Well, that's not going to work. And you probably want to, I know this, we're not here to talk about life insurance, but I think any business owner that's maybe got past that $1 million mark, especially over $10 million mark, it'd be well worth their time to just try to get educated at how some life insurance vehicles could provide some stability or peace of mind or even efficiency in their business.
You shared some incredibly valuable insights. I think a lot of business owners tend to be one of two sides, either a little too scrappy and then they are way too loose. Just that's the sales and entrepreneur habit. Or they're coming from a corporate background and oftentimes they're doing things that they think they should be doing because they've been told, but they don't actually understand why. And so you've kind of solidified a few things that are extremely helpful. Been a wonderful conversation. Legacy is huge. You're a good person. I really have appreciated the time that we've been able to spend together. You're not one that tends to want the spotlight on them all the time and be needing that attention, but I'm sure there may be people that want to say thank you for this interview. What's the best way to do that?
I'm fine sharing my email. So you can put that in the show notes or just, dshirkey@orbitform.com. And then I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. Got a picture with an Orbitform machine behind me on my profile. If there's more than one David Shirkey, I'm not sure there is. Either way.
Well, I'll make sure that we get a link to your LinkedIn profile, and then listeners, you know how to get a hold of him on email as well. Seriously, it has been a pleasure spending time with you, talking about legacy. Can't wait to hear how Generation 2 and eventually Generation 3 come out with this.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.